Unsolved.
JonBenet Ramsey case, Final Jeopardy. All right, everybody, our final category today is real or phony ransom notes. This person wrote a 3-page ransom note in Boulder, Colorado on Christmas night. Okay, contestant number 1. Who is an intruder? Maybe. Contestant number 2. Who is John Ramsey? Maybe. Contestant number 3. Who is Patsy Ramsey? Maybe. That's what this show is about. First, if this was a college class assignment, write a ransom note to a father whose daughter has been kidnapped by a foreign faction. This ransom note would get an A. It's almost perfect. There's really nothing majorly wrong with it. Now there's one thing that sticks out, is we will call you tomorrow. If this was written prior to JonBenet's death, before she was kidnapped, then that statement could mean that the kidnapper would call sometime between 8 and 10 on the day they found the note. But otherwise, it's going to be the next day. So this implies, in my opinion, that this ransom note was written after JonBenet was deceased. And continuing on with my opinion, the ransom note explains why JonBenet is missing. Whomever wrote it did not want the police called. Most likely did not care about receiving the money. And he or she knew about John Ramsey's business. Second, we're going to look at the clues in the ransom note. So the first thing I see is this: make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. Why does it matter if he brings too small a suitcase? What's the bank gonna say? Sorry, that's not an adequate size attaché to carry $118,000. We're not giving you the money. You'll have to come back tomorrow with a better suitcase or something. So is the clue that JonBenet's dead body was going to go inside the suitcase. And that's why the size of the suitcase or the attaché mattered. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. Does this statement provide a clue? Well, I'll leave it at this. Who would suggest this? We might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery. I don't know the significance here, but it is definitely rewarding them for getting the money quicker. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. This is an odd statement because it's so far ahead of where they are at this moment. And remember, Beth, John Ramsey's oldest daughter, died several years before, so they would have had a proper burial for her. The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you. Well, would John write this statement? It just doesn't seem like he would. Speaking to anyone will result in your daughter being beheaded. This is so over the top, especially when there is no foul language in the note. None. Not one word even close to being offensive. So this is kind of a real bold statement. To me, this suggests that the ransom note was written after JonBenet's death and her strangling and the cord being tightly embedded in her neck. You and your family are under constant scrutiny, as well as the authorities. Like there's this massive surveillance team watching the Ramseys and the police. Does that make sense? Or is it just the person sees like everyone is judging them, and this has been happening for a while? With an intruder, most people think that the ransom note was written before JonBenet was murdered. And so the note was for that morning. And it says that they'll call between 8 and 10 that morning. And that's what the police thought, because they thought it was written by some intruder. However, in the ransom note, it says if we monitor you getting the money earlier, then there might be an earlier delivery of JonBenet. But how can that happen? How can it be earlier than 8 a.m.? That's just not realistic. Why would the kidnappers care if John Ramsey was arrested? Why would they care about JonBenet's proper burial? Why is the ransom note free of foul language? It's rated G. People say the ransom note is like in a movie. This implies that real kidnappers didn't write it. They would write a real ransom note. The reason that John wrote the ransom note is because he was going to have to carry out all this. He had to do this in the morning. So that's why it says the size of the suitcase, or the size of the ransom amount, or be arrested, or we might call early. He wasn't sure how it was going to go, and so he wanted it to be flexible so he could accomplish what he needed to. A lot of the note seems to be about Patsy's feelings and emotions. I advise you to be rested. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. You and your family are under constant scrutiny. It's up to you now, John. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. Maybe Patsy was thinking about that because JonBenet's body was going to be disposed of somewhere. One scenario that seems to fit is Patsy wrote the ransom note with John's help in mind. She wanted him to dispose of JonBenet's dead body in the morning and cover up this crime. She wanted him to go to the bank to retrieve the money and remove JonBenet in the big suitcase. How do we not know that Patsy did not spring this on John that morning? And he said, "No, I'm not going to do that. You need to call the police." Yet, John did not implicate Patsy that morning. He just went along with the big charade. Well, this ends this episode of Unsolved. And if you leave a comment, make sure it's in the form of a question. See you next weekend.